You've stopped texting. They've stopped texting too, and now you're sitting in this deafening quiet, wondering if they've even noticed you're gone. Are they relieved? Do they miss you? Or is this exactly what they wanted all along? Here's what most people don't get about mutual no contact with an avoidant partner. This isn't the ending you think it is. It's actually the start of a psychological unraveling that will reveal the full truth about your relationship, about them, and most importantly, about you. By the time this video ends, you're going to understand the hidden emotional journey your avoidant ex is going through right now in the silence. You'll learn why their feelings shift so much as the weeks pass, and you'll discover how to read the signs that tell you whether they're truly evolving or just running the same old patterns with a new face. Because what happens in mutual silence isn't really about who breaks first. It's about who transforms. And I'm going to show you exactly how to tell the difference. So let's talk about what's actually happening right now, in this very moment, inside your avoidant partner's mind. And I promise you, it's not what you're picturing right now. While you're probably anxious and overthinking every part of your relationship, your avoidant partner is likely feeling something unexpected: relief. When both sides go quiet, the avoidant nervous system reads this as pure safety. All the emotional weight they'd been carrying, the unspoken expectations, the need to show up, to explain themselves, to be emotionally available, all of it disappears in an instant. Attachment researchers have identified what they call deactivating strategies in avoidant people. When a relationship starts feeling too close, too demanding, or too emotionally intense, their nervous system literally reads closeness as a threat. It's not something they choose, it's neurological. Their body sends out danger signals even when there's no real danger there. So when you stop reaching out, their system finally relaxes, the alarm shuts off, they can breathe again. But here's what makes this silence fundamentally different from every other time there's been distance in your relationship. In the past, they felt safe because they knew you'd eventually reach out. You were the one managing the connection. You were the one bridging the gap. They had emotional security without any vulnerability. They kept control without effort. They knew deep down you'd always be there. But when you stop contacting them too, when the silence becomes mutual, that invisible safety net disappears and their sense of control starts to crack. This is the moment when relief stops feeling comfortable, because what comes next is something they didn't prepare for, something that's going to expose the truth about whether this person can actually handle real intimacy or if they just like the idea of having you around. As days turn into weeks, that first wave of relief turns into something more complicated. Curiosity, then confusion, then eventually a creeping sense of fear. They start wondering why you're not chasing anymore. The silence that felt like freedom starts to feel like rejection. And their mind begins asking questions it never had to face before. Why haven't they reached out? Did they actually move on? Why aren't they fighting for us? What if I've lost them for real this time? If this is matching what you're going through right now, go ahead and hit the like button. It genuinely helps me understand what content is actually serving you, and it helps this reach other people who need to hear it. This confusion phase is when you'll start noticing the tests. They'll watch your social media stories. They'll like an old photo from months back. They'll send seemingly innocent messages that feel casual but really aren't. Hey, how have you been? Saw this and thought of you. Random question, but these aren't genuine attempts at reconnecting. They're breadcrumbs. They're checking to see if you're still emotionally available, if the door is still cracked open, if they can still have access to you without actually being vulnerable. And this is key to understand. These small tests aren't really about missing you as a person. They're about regaining control of the dynamic. They're confirming that their emotional safety net, you, is still in place. Because without your pursuit, they're forced to face something truly terrifying for an avoidant person. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of not mattering, the fear that maybe they weren't as important to you as they assumed. But while they're spiraling through confusion and fear, something completely different is happening on your side of the silence. And this difference is what decides how this whole situation resolves. At first, the silence is painful. You're hurting. You're replaying every conversation, every moment, every sign you might have missed. You're second-guessing your choice not to reach out. Your anxious attachment is screaming at you to fix it, to make contact, to keep the connection alive no matter what. But then, slowly, something fundamental starts to shift. Without the constant emotional labor of holding the relationship together, managing their moods, interpreting their silence, You start to reclaim energy you didn't even realize you'd lost. You begin to breathe more easily. The silence that once felt like punishment starts to feel like protection, like peace. You start reclaiming the self-worth that got worn down in the relationship. You begin seeing the dynamic with real clarity, how much effort you were pouring in, how little you were getting back, how you were constantly managing their emotions while completely ignoring your own needs. And gradually, the silence stops being something you're enduring and becomes something you're choosing. It turns into its own kind of closure. This is where real detachment happens. Not the performative kind where you're secretly hoping they'll notice and come running back, but the genuine kind where you actually stop needing them to choose you because you've finally chosen yourself. And here's what's powerful about this shift. While you're healing, growing, and rediscovering who you are outside this relationship, they're feeling the emotional fallout of their defense mechanisms, maybe for the first time. Loneliness, regret, nostalgia, a nagging fear of being forgotten. They might replay memories of you. They might quietly long for the connection you shared, but they feel too guarded, too defended to reach out directly, because reaching out means admitting they need you. And for an avoidant person, that admission can feel like losing their whole identity. Eventually, many avoidant people do come back. A cautious text, a casual comment, a quiet re-entry into your world, not with apologies or explanations, not with depth or vulnerability, but with a test to see if the door is still open. They're checking whether you're still the same person who used to chase them, who used to accept breadcrumbs, who used to settle for inconsistency. But here's what sets this moment apart from all the earlier cycles. By now, you're no longer hooked by their patterns. The distance doesn't feel mysterious or intriguing anymore. It feels predictable. You can see it clearly for exactly what it is: a defense mechanism, a fear of intimacy dressed up as independence and self-sufficiency. And this is where you face the most important choice. Not based on hope, not based on potential, not based on who they could become if they just tried harder, but based on who they're actually showing you they are right now, through their actions. When an avoidant person who's genuinely doing inner work reaches out after silence, there's accountability there. They acknowledge the distance. They share what they've been reflecting on. They might not have all the answers, and they might still be scared, but they show you through their actions that they're capable of moving toward you even when it's deeply uncomfortable. But if they reach out with breadcrumbs, with hey stranger messages that go nowhere, with surface level conversations that carefully avoid any real depth or vulnerability, that's giving you your answer in real time. What they're showing you is this: I can miss you, I can think about you, I can feel nostalgic about what we had, but I'm not willing to do the uncomfortable, messy work of actually showing up authentically. And no amount of silence, no amount of space, no amount of waiting is going to change that basic truth. Because this was never about using the right tactics or timing. This is about capacity. This is about whether they have the emotional resources and the willingness to do the work that real intimacy requires. Your real power shows up when you stop reaching out, not as a strategy to manipulate them into missing you, but because you've genuinely healed enough that you no longer need them to validate your worth. Your silence becomes a statement of real emotional independence. And that's exactly what an avoidant person feels most strongly. It gets through their defenses in a way that chasing never could. For some avoidant people, this becomes a real wake-up call that kicks off their healing journey. They realize what they've lost. They start confronting their patterns. They begin doing the hard inner work. They start learning that intimacy doesn't actually mean losing themselves. For others, they simply escape into new distractions, a new relationship, throwing themselves into work, new hobbies, new cities, anything that helps them avoid feeling what the silence is trying to teach them. And that's not your failure. That's not something you could have stopped. That's their choice, their path, their responsibility. Either way, silence becomes the mirror that shows both your truth and theirs. It shows you who you're becoming without them. And it shows them who they are without someone else managing their emotional world. So here's where you are right now. You're in the silence. And the question isn't whether they'll eventually reach out. The question is, who are you becoming during this silence? Are you using this time to heal, to set real boundaries you'll actually keep, to rebuild the self-worth that got damaged in this relationship? Or are you sitting in the silence, holding your breath, waiting for them to validate you by coming back? Because in the end, what shapes your future has nothing to do with who contacts whom first. It's about who grows. It's about who evolves. It's about who does the work. For you, the silence can become a turning point for self-worth and emotional freedom. A space where you remember who you were before this relationship and discover who you're becoming after it. For them, it becomes a face-off with fear and old wounds, a choice point between sticking with old patterns or finally trying something different. Silence doesn't destroy real connection. It simply reveals whether the foundation was strong enough to stand without someone constantly chasing, convincing, and compensating. And if it wasn't strong enough to survive without you doing all the work, then what you're losing isn't actually love. It's the exhausting, soul-draining job of trying to talk someone into choosing you. So what actually happens next when both you and your avoidant partner go completely silent? You get to find out who you are without them. You get to discover what you're capable of when you're not pouring all your energy into managing someone else's fear of intimacy. You get to learn what it feels like to choose yourself first. And that discovery, that transformation, that reclaiming of your own life is the most powerful thing that could happen. Not just for this relationship, but for every relationship you'll have going forward. Because you're learning the most important lesson. You can't love someone into healing. You can't sacrifice yourself into making someone ready. You can't chase someone into choosing you. Real love doesn't ask you to shrink yourself, to accept breadcrumbs, to live in constant anxiety over whether you're too much or not enough. Real love meets you where you are. It shows up consistently. It does the work even when it's uncomfortable. And if this silence is teaching you to stop settling for anything less than that, then it's not an ending, it's a beginning. If you got real value from this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Your support helps this content reach people who need to hear these truths. And remember, the silence isn't empty. It's full of your transformation. Here's a continuation, same context, sized to roughly a 10-minute script. Let's talk about what you should actually be doing during this silence, because how you spend this time decides everything about how this story ends. Most people treat no contact like a waiting room. They sit there, phone in hand, refreshing apps, checking if their ex has been online, counting days like it's a countdown to a reunion. That's not healing. That's just suffering quietly instead of loudly. Real no contact starts the moment you stop treating the silence as a tactic and start treating it as a tool for your own recovery. This is the difference between people who come out of this stronger and people who come out of it just as anxious as they went in, only more exhausted. The people who transform during this time are doing specific things even if they don't realize it. First, they stop monitoring. They're not checking social media every hour to see if their ex posted something, liked something, or went somewhere new. Every time you check, you're reopening the wound and feeding the anxious part of your brain that's desperate for information it doesn't actually need. You don't need to know what they're doing. You need to know what you're doing. Second, they get honest about the relationship as it actually was, not as they remember it through the haze of missing someone. This is hard because your brain is wired to remember the good moments more vividly once someone is gone. It's called rosy retrospection, and it's why breakups feel so much harder a few weeks in than they did on day one. You start forgetting the loneliness you felt while you were with them, and you start romanticizing the rare good moments instead. If you want to heal for real, you have to write down or really sit with the full picture. Not just the late-night conversations that felt intimate, but the weeks of distance that came after them. Not just the one time they showed up, but the 10 times they didn't. Third, they rebuild routines that have nothing to do with the relationship. This sounds simple, but it's one of the most powerful things you can do. Your nervous system attached itself to certain patterns, certain times of day you used to text, certain places you used to go together. Replacing those patterns with new ones, a morning walk, a class, time with friends you'd neglected, tells your brain that life continues and that you are not defined by waiting for someone else's message. Now let's talk about what's happening on the other side, because understanding their timeline helps you stop projecting your own healing speed onto them. Avoidant attachment didn't form overnight, and it doesn't resolve overnight either. If they ever do come back changed, it's usually not in the first few weeks. The first few weeks are about that initial relief and then confusion we already talked about. Real change, if it comes at all, tends to show up much later, after they've had enough time alone to actually sit with discomfort instead of running from it. This matters because so many people see a small sign, a like, a story view, a casual text, and they think it means transformation is happening fast. It almost never does. Real growth in someone with avoidant patterns is slow and often invisible from the outside until they choose to act differently, not just feel differently. Feeling regret is not the same as becoming capable of intimacy. Plenty of avoidant people feel real regret and still never change their behavior, because feeling something and acting on it are two completely different skills. So how do you actually tell the difference between someone who's doing real work and someone who's just lonely and looking for comfort? Watch for consistency over time, not intensity in a single moment. A grand gesture means nothing if it's followed by 3 weeks of silence again. What matters is whether someone shows up the same way on a random Tuesday as they do after an emotional low point. Avoidant people in genuine repair mode tend to underpromise and overdeliver. They don't make big declarations. They just quietly keep showing up, even when it would be easier not to. Watch for whether they can tolerate your needs without disappearing. This is the real test. Anyone can be present when things are easy. The question is, what happens when you express a need, a boundary, a moment of vulnerability? Do they stay in the conversation even if it's uncomfortable? Or do they go quiet for days, punishing the relationship for asking for more closeness? That single pattern tells you almost everything you need to know about whether real change has happened. And here's something important: nobody tells you enough. You are allowed to not wait and find out. You don't owe anyone the role of test subject for their healing journey. If the silence has shown you clarity, if you've rebuilt your life and found peace without them, you don't have to keep that door open indefinitely, just in case they eventually get their act together. Closure doesn't have to come from them explaining themselves. Closure can come from you deciding you've learned enough. This is where a lot of people get stuck. They confuse closure with permission. They think they need their ex to acknowledge what happened, to apologize, to validate their pain before they can move on. But waiting for that is handing your healing over to someone who has already shown you they struggle with showing up emotionally. You can give yourself everything you're waiting for them to give you. You can acknowledge your own pain. You can validate your own experience. You can decide the story is finished, even if they never write the final chapter the way you wanted. If you do choose to leave the door open, do it from a place of genuine peace, not quiet hope disguised as patience. There's a real difference between saying, "I've healed, and if they ever show up differently, I'll consider it," versus secretly orbiting your phone hoping today is the day. One comes from strength. The other keeps you stuck in the exact same anxious loop you're trying to escape. In the end, the silence was never really about them. It was always about whether you could sit with yourself without needing someone else to complete the picture, whether you could build a life solid enough that someone's absence doesn't shake its foundation. That's the real victory here, not getting them back, not proving a point, not winning some invisible competition over who needed who more. The victory is becoming someone who doesn't need the silence to end in order to feel whole. If this gave you clarity, like and subscribe so more of this reaches people going through the same thing. And remember, you were never the one who needed fixing.